Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Chinacchio. I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. But Dan, as the fight always has to continue, the annuals don't count.
All right, that's fair. As always, I don't. I'm not committed to convincing you in the intro to every episode. Well, everybody, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. Take it away, Mark.
You bet. Well, today on the show, Dan and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 60 slash Legacy number 861. Right, Dan? Am I losing track of my legacy numbering there?
That's correct, Mark.
Uh,
861.
Okay, well, Amazing Spider-Man number 60 was written by, and let me just say, in addition to always arguing about annuals, the other thing that you come for Amazing Spider Talk for is to hear me mispronounce names of creators. It was written by Nick Spencer, with pencils by Mark Bagley, inks by John Dell and Andrew Hennessy, colors by Rachelle Rosenberg, and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna, and a cover by Mark Bagley, John Dell, and Nathan Fairbairn. Fairbairn is probably the one I screwed up the most. But this issue was first released on February 24th, 2021.
But Mark and I are not alone because today we've invited back on our good friend of the show and a new editor at Publishers Weekly, as well as a New York Times published author. It's Alan Scherstl. Welcome back to the show, Alan.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be back with you too and talking about this interesting issue. But I mean, I have to say that, when this annual discussion comes up, sometimes I feel like you two are trapped in this cycle of punishment for all of this and you're locked in place and never moving forward. Like this will always be your life. Like Harry Osborn said he wanted to show you guys hell. Maybe this is it.
And this is why we always bring on the available Alan Scherstl. All right, guys. Well,
I turn to Alan. I turn to Alan for these insights and for his semi-un-PC nicknames for characters.
Well, Alan, thanks for coming on the show. We're here, of course, to talk about Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 60. And, the reason we're having you on is because you came at me with, kind of a hot take on this issue on Facebook, as sometimes you do after reading an issue. And, I'll take any excuse to invite you on the show. But I felt like this was also an appropriate issue to kind of talk about the trajectory of the Nick Spencer run and how it has been handled over the past year or two. I think it's been a little while since you've been on, Alan, so I'm looking forward to kind of catching up with your overall thoughts on the run thus far and on this issue. So I guess let's start there, Alan, so people can kind of get a frame for your feelings about Nick Spencer. I mean, the last time I had you on, I think, was for Absolute Carnage, where I forced you to read Venom comics. What have you been thinking about this Amazing Spider-Man run thus far? Have you been more or less in line with Mark and my response to it?
Let me just apologize for coming at you on Facebook over this. I'm not in the Spider Slack. I probably should be, but for the last have not had to be in a workplace Slack, and I just can't bring myself to load up Slack. After having had after having had a job where I had to be on Slack all day. So I apologize. I should save these takes for there, but instead I brought them to you. As for the Spencer run, yeah, I am mostly in agreement, maybe in between the two of you on this. I feel like throughout the Spencer run, as Mark would put it, I believe Mark has said this on the show, we often get a great individual issue, but it doesn't feel like it connects to a larger ongoing story. And this run has so many ideas It has so many big arcs, and it has so many things that it never gets back to after it's introduced them. And I wonder, sometimes we'll get into this a bit more in a few minutes, but I mean, I wonder a lot as I'm reading this run. The two things that I think formal issues with it are, the first one has been that it is very often lacks Peter's narrative voice. And I find that a real surprise from Spencer, because he's so adept at putting us, giving us the voice of a kind of a character, often a ne'er-do-well character, whom he really likes his Ant-Mans and his boomerangs.
Yeah.
Not Boomerang.
Yeah, Boomerang.
Yeah, it's Boomerang. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Fred
I sometimes
Myers.
mix up Boomerang and Bullseye, and being Bullseye's roommate might be even worse. Uh,
But
but
now that you said that, I would think I would love to see Nick Spencer write Bullseye, but that's we'll put a
I'd
pin
love
in that.
to.
Sorry. Yeah.
And the second formal issue I tend to have with this run is, I think it really lacks. The lack of the 2 pages that have been cut from Marvel Comics over the years. The 22-page story now being the 20-page story, I think really has had an impact on this run, in that, we get it in this issue, but as I've said before on this show, I miss it when we do not get a page of Spider-Man swinging around town thinking about his problems, or thinking about all the things that are going on, or thinking about how hard it is to balance all these things in his life, or thinking about what it is he wishes he were doing other than rushing to prevent whatever thing he's rushing to prevent, or hunting down whatever villain he's hunting down. Without those pages and without much of Peter's narrative voice, this book for 60 issues now has not felt driven by this character. It has not felt like the character's motivations are shaping the drama at all.
Was that
At
something?
all is probably putting it a little too strongly, but I really miss that. And there's a lot of good individual issues. Every issue has strong moments. Nick Spencer is one of the smartest comics writers there is. I think I've always felt like he got a lot of he got a lot of I'm going to use the word guff because I'm trying not to swear here, for his Captain America Hydra story, which was a brilliant story, and he pulled it off like so well. And it's one of the best, Marvel event comics that I've ever read. And like, I've enjoyed almost everything he's ever written before. And it's just his Amazing Spider-Man that I find is not really knocking me out.
Do you think that's due to like the combination of the character and the changes in the medium? I mean, I've long said that the erasure of thought bubbles, kind of took away a core element of Spider-Man. Is this something that you found unique to criticize about this run, or did you experience this similar kind of problem in Dan Slott's also bi-monthly Amazing Spider-Man book?
In Dan Slott's run, you always knew where his head was at. You always know where Peter's head was at, or Ock's head was at, when, and you always know where, in all of Spencer's other comics, who's thinking what. But yeah, I do think that the death of the thought bubble has put us into this mode of comic storytelling that is not as often caught up in the present, beat to beat, moment to moment of what the characters are feeling. And so often instead we get a somewhat unrelated monologue playing out over the panel images. And Spencer and many other creators who take this approach too leave it to us to like reconcile the images with the text and come to a greater meaning. And I think in terms of, a mainstream Spider-Man comic, there is some immediacy and excitement and engagement that is lost in that technique.
So this is a good kind of bridge to this issue, which I think, I dare say, is quite the opposite of
Exactly.
what we've been describing. So let's go around the horn here. Alan, as you're our guest, I'll let you kind of start things off. What did you think about Amazing Spider-Man number 60 overall as a comic book and as an entry in Nick Spencer's ongoing story?
I think I'd rather just talk about the first. For the other stuff, I think maybe get to that a little later, just because there's a lot to unpack and I have way too many thoughts. But I mean, this is my favorite issue since the first issue. And I've never actively disliked this run. I've always felt all along that, oh, we're just about to the really cool thing. Or sometimes I just really enjoy an issue, but often it's just, we're just about to the really, that's coming real soon. And then it never quite gets here. This is the first time in this run where I felt, oh, we're just about to the really cool thing. And also, oh, that was a really good, satisfying issue at the same time.
Mark, how about you? What were your thoughts on this issue? I know I texted you like, I can't wait for you to read this because I feel like this issue has been very polarizing, and I really don't know where you're going to fall on this one. So I am curious myself what you think about it.
Well, that's it, and maybe I should like kind of admit some of the sausage making here, in that I the first time, I knew going into this issue without having anything spoiled for me that this was very polarizing based on some of the stuff I was seeing on social media, and on first read I was like, that was really good. I felt really good about that. And then I gave it a few more subsequent reads, like I like to do. We come on and talk about this stuff, Dan. And well, my overall opinion didn't change. Some of the at least some of my negativity about this issue and how it fits into the larger run, that's being executed here, kind of came through and kind of soured me on it overall, which may not be fair, but like that's the thing. I mean, like we're talking about, what are comics? They're sequential art. We're telling a sequential story, and things can be good in isolation, but like it still matters where it comes in the greater picture. And still, as much as I enjoyed this issue, if I was on the old desert island analogy, and someone gave me this comic, I'd be like, that was a really great Spider-Man comic that captures a lot about the character. But like the thing is, we I guess we know too much. We know where this fits in and probably what's coming next. And I like on subsequent reads, I kind of, with that in mind, was thinking, yeah, now I'm still kind of agitated the way I've been agitated with other things about this run. So that's kind of where I fall in it. I'm kind of, I guess, both-sizing it a little bit here.
Fascinating. And as for me, I, like you, really enjoyed this on my first read, with a few wrinkles here and there that I'm sure we're going to discuss. I think this is the issue that I know it would make no sense getting this issue as number 2 in this run after the first issue, but in many ways it feels like the second issue of a story, or the first real meaningful step forward that we've gotten in this run. And I know that that's not entirely true. We've seen characters progress. Mary Jane, I think, has progressed the most of any character in this run in terms of her autonomy and her place within the supporting cast. And I think that comes out here in this issue a little bit, barring one or two things that make me really uncomfortable. And I think this issue delivers on the kind of things that we're used to from the Nick Spencer run, which is, a commentary on Spider-Man comics, addressing both the past and future and what he's currently doing with some kind of metatextuality. And that stuff hit me all really strong my first read through. It was really plain as day what he's doing and what he's trying to say. On second and third read through, like you, Mark, I still really enjoyed it, but I do feel like emotionally, I have been at this place for like a year now, and this is the comic kind of catching up to it, and that's really refreshing. But I was like, oh, I've already been here. Like you said, I know where this is going, and I know, Nick Spencer, what you're trying to do. And maybe this is the issue that kind of like nails it down and says like, this is my mission statement. And I appreciate that, even if I feel like I already knew what he was getting at. So there's a joy in finally seeing it like happen, especially that last page reveal for me, where like this kind of like confirmed all my suspicions that I've had since the first issue. But like it could have hit harder if I hadn't long since had that theory, abandoned it, and now have returned to it. So anyway, I think I'm kind of like with you, Mark. Maybe not quite as strongly soured, but yeah, interesting issue. But yeah, 20 issues ago, this would have been like, whoa, what an issue. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
I mean, I wouldn't even say 20 issues ago. I mean, I would say if this came in after the issue where, Kindred murders Peter and resurrects him like 800 times, it would have worked better for me. But like, you know what I mean? But that's not what we got. And I think that's kind of where the frustration lies. It's like, like trying to find the place for this, because it does, either way, I think we're in agreement. As much as we like this, the placement is not necessary based on, again, what's preceded it and what we assume is coming after. And that's the frustration. It's like, like there should have been, there isn't more, I don't feel like there is more thought going into how each issue feeds into the next when it comes to this run. And we can talk about it. Is it the creator? Is it the editor? Whatever. It's still the problem for me.
This does feel like the wrap up to Last Remains that we should have gotten in 55.
Sure. I mean, but like, I also feel like the conclusion to Last Remains wasn't a conclusion, and then the wrap up wasn't a wrap up. You know what I mean? So like, so again, like, where does it fit in? I don't know, because like we still don't really know what happened in that story that made it definitive and worth, all of the tie-in issues and all of the hype and bluster of it. So, yeah.
It's like we finally got to the fireworks factory many, many years later after we set out for the fireworks factory. And instead of a fireworks show at the fireworks factory, we got some metatextual criticism of fireworks. And I welcome that. I mean, I appreciate that it seems that Spencer has the mission, rather, whether it's been imposed by Marvel or it's self-imposed. I appreciate that Spencer feels he has like this mission to dig into the darkest, intentionally forgotten corners of Spider-Man continuity and make some sense of them and rehabilitate them and like take care of Peter, like nurture this character back to something. But I don't know, guys. I don't know. I feel like when Peter is directly on a stage with a spotlight on him, addressing his villain and Mary Jane and, spoilers, Mysterio, and he is like directly addressing the cycle of never growing, of not having a marriage or a child and never growing up, and this being hell. I feel like in some ways this is the writer holding the character accountable for like the preferences and the model of the company that sells his stories. And to me, it just doesn't necessarily make real emotional sense. Like I feel like this run is asking us to believe something that we as comics fans all know isn't true and have adapted to know isn't true. This run is asking us to believe that all of these stories, all of these issues, all of these offshoots actually happened to this one guy. And then that there's all this metaphysical stuff that keeps him from remembering a bunch of it. And I mean, yeah, it's kind of noble that Spencer wants to address this and write these issues of continuity, but also I am totally comfortable if he were just to hand wave all this and give us like 60 issues of Peter and Mary Jane being back together and Peter having this funny roommate and he and the funny roommate adopting a giant tiny lizard. Like why not just tell good, exciting Spider-Man stories rather than have this kind of seminar on the essence of Spider-Man the character and what like the publishing model and fan outrage and changing, generations of creators have done to the character.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I think we should just like forget structure and get into this discussion of this metatext, because I do think that that's the heart of the issue, and there's no better way to get into it. So we're speaking specifically about Peter talking about this kind of cycle of punishment that he seems to have found himself in, which is, I think, and you can correct me, Alan and Mark, if you feel, this is a mischaracterization of it, but to me, it read like you said, Alan, a character addressing the editors and creators who've handled him over the years, saying, like, they're holding me back artificially. Like, something is holding me back artificially. And, we had Tom Brevoort on the show, and, he had his whole manifesto about how, the essence of Spider-Man is his youth. And we've been critical over the years, saying, a character that doesn't grow but continues to make all these mistakes, if you treat it literally and seriously, as Alan, you're saying this book is, he begins to look like a genuine fool of a person who can never learn lessons and is doomed to continuously screw up his life in a way that makes him kind of not even fun to read, because it's like you're reading like the world's most inept, like emotionally inept, like person, like, and we're finally going to address that. And I guess, Alan, you would rather see the book kind of just move on, like forget One More Day, all that stuff. Mark, I'm curious to hear from you. Do you think, because it seems obviously the end of this book has a big page of Mephisto and they're talking about Peter's soul. Do you think that it is important for this book to address One More Day and perhaps resolve it so that the book can move forward? Or do we think the better way for the book to move forward is to just say, forget it, let's just tell good stories?
I honestly think I fall more into the latter camp. And it kind of goes back to what we have said dozens of times, or at least I have said dozens of times, and I know you don't disagree with this, Dan, which was like, for all of the fan hatred and toxicness regarding breaking up the marriage, I have long enjoyed Brand New Day coming from the ashes of One More Day, because for me, those were great, fun stories. And it was kind of like, I when I read those stories in retrospect, and at the time, frankly, I wasn't sitting there being like, oh man, this is a lot of fun, but if just Peter was married, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I never said that. And like, to me, that was like it kind of validated the whole experiment. We could talk about whether One More Day was appropriately executed, but like, it didn't change what came after. But like, to your point, Dan, it's like, just because we kind of hit a reset button on the character doesn't mean like the character should have stopped growing. And it just meant that the growth should have come, I think, from a different point now, because now the marriage was gone. But like you say, like, the character still needs to like learn and reflect. That's just natural, and yeah, like I do feel we have gotten run after run after run that has like negated that idea. But like, Nick Spencer now all of a sudden going back to the source of this and being like, One More Day was a poorly executed story and I want to make right by it. It still doesn't change the fact that like other poor writing and editorial decisions that preceded what he's doing now, like, damaged the character. And, like, him fixing One More Day is not going to fix the character. It just won't. So yeah, like, why don't we stop trying to fix and just write good stuff the way Spider-Man was basically written the first 48 years of his existence, where the character had a progression.
Absolutely could do with this Mephisto storyline, and that's coming up. I mean, it's an exciting, engaging storyline, but like waiting so many issues for it and making it be like kind of the big secret reveal of this long run, just makes it feel like the book is kind of a drag and has been for a while. And like all this kind of dreamlike kindred stuff that has been operating at the edges of the narrative, and the sense of unreality that you guys have addressed many times. I don't hear the kindred alarm, by the way. Like, makes the run feel like weirdly insubstantial as it's happening, because it feels like it's about the idea of a run of Spider-Man comics rather than just being a run of fun, exciting Spider-Man comics. And I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing, what he is going to do with One More Day. That's really exciting. Nobody who picks up a comic or like looks at these issues on Marvel Unlimited because they like the MCU is going to have any idea what the hell any of this is or why any of this matters. There's a reason Hobgoblin Lives was a mini series rather than taking over the books for a couple months.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
really good point.
and frankly, I mean, that's something that I've hit upon a number of times here. I mean, whether it be the use of like the Sin Eater or like the references to Spectacular 200. I mean, like we are just constantly mining these niche stories that granted they're great stories, but yeah, I mean, like we're in the entertainment business here, and like if you're just coming in and checking in on this for the first time and you're not like a super fan, you're not going to know what the heck's going on, and that's like Marvel it's doing itself a disservice with that. Like, I mean, I don't know who they're hooking into this book besides very hardcore fans who might have lapsed off the book following One More Day.
I can tell
Of the
you
Democrats desperately trying to win back the Reagan Republicans who they
Yeah.
lost in 1980.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, let's go back to the Rust Belt here, guys.
I can tell you anecdotally that I've gotten a number of messages on our Patreon this week from people saying, thank you for these shows. I would have no idea what is going on in this comic without you guys summarizing them and going through them and providing the connections for me. And I mean, it's directed directly at us, which is weird to hear us complaining about it. As for my feelings about the One More Dayness of it all, is that like I actually don't necessarily think that the character of Spider-Man is really at the heart of the brokenness of One More Day. For me, it's the Mary Jane of it all, because there is no way that you can't have Mary Jane in a substantial role in this comic. Like, barring someone coming up with an equally wonderful to read character with a very fascinating history overnight, like Mary Jane is a core cast member. I would say maybe the co-lead of the Spider-Man titles from over the years. I mean, there's been great characters that have been invented over the past few years. I think Anna Maria Marconi had a lot of promise when she first kind of came onto the scene, and I don't really know what's been done with her since. I won't include Sanjani on that list, but you can't replace Mary Jane. And so long as Mary Jane is going to be in this book, that question is going to hang over the head of that character about like what is the lore for Mary Jane, what is their relationship like, and why can't it move forward, right? It's a way of like arresting Peter in another way, which is he's a warm-blooded male character with Mary Jane on the page with him, a person with whom he's very close to, and the book just can't avoid it. So in my mind, you kind of need to get into this a little bit. I don't think we should have spent this much time on it. It's like touching the third rail for a prolonged period of time, hoping that the shock will continue to shock you like it did when you first touched it. Which, okay, now I'm straining a metaphor here, but like
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, I think
that we do need to get into the sum, but sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think it's important to heal the Mary Jane relationship, which should be a core relationship at the heart of this book. And so long as there's some magic wand reason for why it can't happen, you might as well do a story that redeems that choice in some way and ties it into the themes of Spider-Man, which, if I'm to jump ahead, and we should get into the content of this book, Spider-Man says in this book, I feel responsible for this. And if it is his choice to make a deal with the devil and damage his soul in some way that has led to this kind of increasing damage, to me, that's actually a really great idea for a Spider-Man story and a way to redeem what people saw as a terrible choice to write Peter making a deal with the devil. which is why I think I've long held on to this theory that that's what was going on here. So I'm here for it. I just don't know how you can sustain 60 plus comics on the back of that thing that people find so revolting. So anyway, I think that's why there was the reaction to this comic that there was. So anyway, overall thoughts. Let's get into the content of this issue. We open with a dream sequence like we've been getting, like you described, Alan, and we get this short scene with MJ. She has gotten breakfast for Peter. And I thought there was a nice moment where she says, "No time for moody narration now." And this is kind of part of that Spencerism of acknowledging his own writing within the title itself, even if in like a charming way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a nice little moment. I mean, I feel like MJ's personality as a whole was really shining here. I mean, like, oh, I just made you breakfast that I got from the bodega. You know what I mean? Like, it's like those are like the little lines of. I mean, the whole scene is charming. Like, and to your original point, Dan. I mean, I don't want to backtrack on this conversation here, but like, I fully subscribe to what you're saying about MJ and her essentialness to the larger arc of Spider-Man, but these moments like these certainly validate what you're saying. It's just that, even when the character was at her best, we didn't always get stuff like this from her. So, I mean, but like this was certainly a charming sequence, and yes, very meta, very knowing, but also great for the character.
We get a check-in. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, my mic had a delay or something on there. I was just going to add that I feel like in this issue, and maybe kind of stealthily in the background for quite a while here, Mary Jane is this run's protagonist. She's the one making the decision. She's the one who knows what's actually going on. And here, she is the one to wake Peter from his nightmare, get him out onto a stage, put the spotlight on him, and get him to confess all of these things that he's feeling, almost as if she's preparing for him to actually face whatever it is that she knows that he doesn't. And I mean, and she's done that before. Like I mentioned to you, Dan, when we were talking on Facebook, this issue bears a little bit of similarity to Amazing Spider-Man number 275, one of the most lackluster Hobgoblin issues, but a great Peter Mary Jane issue, where they walk through Central Park and she asks him how he became Spider-Man, and they reprint the origin, and she convinces him not to give it up. He was going through one of his "I'm done with this" phases, and she convinces him not to give it up. And she's playing something like that same role here.
Just to jump off that point, the other point you just made, Alan, about Mary Jane, it is kind of funny to me how, with all, going into this story, and I mean at the onset too, like, she, of all the characters in Peter's orbit, she seems the least nonplussed about the mere existence of Kindred and his connection to Harry Osborn, which I think is a very curious decision being made here for the character. Like yes, she's not only omniscient, like she is driving this story, and also seems, whereas I think in other instances she would have a stronger reaction or opinion to what is happening, she seems very both calm and kind of removed from what is actually happening in a weird way. And maybe this goes back to Dan, and I don't want to oversell it, Dan, but maybe there's something back to your original theory about Kindred or something. But it's a very deliberate choice for the character here. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what quite to make of it, but I think she, in issue 25, where she has that kind of standoff against the new Electro, and the kind of events that led up to that, with Carly getting her into that like AA group for significant others or friends of superheroes, she's kind of like owned her role within this world, which has kind of put her above it in some way. Like she's very kind of like come what may, if you will, and in that I think it's given her a bit of peace, and I think we're seeing that kind of like come out here. I thought it was really interesting that in the kind of lead up to this moment from the theater in Amazing Spider-Man 96, that she discusses going to a therapist after the death of Gwen, who she calls her best friend, which I think is a weird retcon because I don't remember them being best friends. Although I guess you could read their kind of flirty competitiveness as like friendly as they competed over Peter. But I don't remember the two of them like hanging out on their own. But even just the idea of Mary Jane going to therapy suggests like it pushes this character into a more well-rounded place of someone whose emotions we should be actively charting. And so I think it does give value to how she's behaving here, because that's something that Nick Spencer values.
It always seemed to me that she grew up before Peter did. And you see that in the DeFalco Friends run. And, where she, when she confesses to him, "I've known you were Spider-Man," and then they have that she talks about her past, it just seems to me that she is, in many ways, a more rounded, mature, thoughtful character. But I do you have the Kindred alarm ready? I hope it's ready, because this issue, she makes a fashion choice that reminds me of your original brilliant theory about who the Kindred's identity, when you notice like the buckles and her purple jacket or her purple coat in one old issue. I forget which issue it was.
Was it 143, Dan?
I believe so. It's the first Kiss
coats.
issue.
Yeah.
Purple coats and Kindred. In this issue, she is literally wearing the coat that Prince wore in like 1983 and 1984 on the Purple Rain tour. On the 1999 tour, on the cover of Purple Rain. She's not wearing the frilly ruffled blouse. Prince wears it more feminine than she does, which is a breakthrough for our society, I believe. And but I'm not saying it looks like that coat. I'm saying it is that coat. That coat is the model for this coat that Bagley has drawn on her. This is not the colorist's coat. Prince's Purple Rain coat. And I don't know if they're making fun of you or if that's a clue.
I mean, it could also just be that. It could also just be that for Mark Bagley, Prince and Purple Rain is like the current hot record, So I'm just saying, Bagley is not always known for his currency.
I've become less convinced that Mary Jane is like associated with Kindred directly. But I still do think that the design of the Kindred outfit is based off of that first kiss between Peter and MJ in the airport. Even though the coloring of Kindred seems to change issue to issue. I don't know whether he has a purple coat or an orange coat or what, as the colorists change it. But I'm going to go with that he's wearing a purple coat, if I had to put my money on something here. Speaking of Kindred and appearances in this issue, I thought the sequence where Mary Jane has Peter close his eyes and imagine Kindred be in that theater with them was beautifully laid out on the page, of the darkness kind of seeping through the wall, Peter's narration, and him opening his eyes. And then the half-page reveal of Kindred. It was the first time I was ever convinced by Mark Bagley's drawing of Kindred like this was the same menacing character that we got from like Otley and Ramos. He had the right kind of edginess. The inks were sharper, and he just looked way more menacing. And I love this image, and it convinced me that Mark Bagley had like dialed into that character finally.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just go a step further. I mean, like you had the menace being conveyed by Bagley, but like, I mean, this whole issue, frankly, was in Bagley's wheelhouse in terms of just capturing, like it actually reminded me at many occasions, and if I'm overstating it here because it's such a classic issue. I apologize, but of that ultimate issue where Peter is revealing to MJ that he's Spider-Man, and it's just the two of them talking in his bedroom, just the intimacy of the character interactions being captured between the two of them. Like I was getting strong vibes of that throughout this issue, in addition to the good costume character work.
And I love his Peter Parker in this issue. He's slightly older looking than the Peter that we got during Bagley's initial run on the title, but he's not quite like the Richard Parker that we saw him draw then or in Ultimate Spider-Man. And so like it's been interesting to me, like between Ultimate Spider-Man and this, we've seen his version of like teenage Peter, early 20s Peter, and now like mid to late 20s Peter, and even like 30s, 40s Peter in the clone issues from the Ultimate run. And not to mention Life Story, where we got a decade at a time Peter getting older. So like there's no artist that I think has better captured that. And it's nice to see that this Peter, at least I think especially in this issue, seems genuinely visually distinct in terms of like where he's at in the stage of his life. So,
Excellent.
So Peter, you're talking about the sequence of all these heads. Peter unloads, and to me, this is kind of like the bulk, the heart of the issue is like Peter getting at this kind of like where he feels, and we talked a lot about this in the opening of this story of this episode, is this kind of metatextual thing of cycles, and that he feels like he might actually be responsible this time. And for me, we didn't talk about this earlier, even additional metatextually, they talk about how like the rubber band that we've talked about on the show before, that like there's a core of the character that can be stretched this way or that, but it inevitably always snaps back to the middle. And so he brings up like things like Avengers and Parker Industries and how he has been a part of those things, but inevitably they don't last for very long. Do you think this story is going to suggest at some point that the reason that those status quos have not stuck is because of some mystical force that wants to keep Peter stagnant? Is that where this is heading, you think? Like the literalization of Peter's publishing cycle and editorial demands?
I mean, it's certainly an interesting theory. I mean, and I think also, the fact that, we've talked about before how whatever you want to believe in full about Kindred's identity, I mean, there is no denying the fact that what brought Kindred out on this book, whether it's coincidence or not, was him finally kind of making a bigger step forward with MJ than he's ever made before. And it makes me wonder, one of the core essences of this character has always been his ability to fight through adversity, and maybe in finally pushing harder against the rubber band than he's ever pushed before is what's kind of bringing this all to a head. And maybe that's what we're going to explore here. I mean, like it's I know, we not to jump ahead, we kind of end with this question of what is wrong with Peter's soul, but maybe it's the fact that it has now gotten to this point actually shows that ultimately his soul is truly good, because it kind of goes back to the sense of the character that we got all the way back in those Ditko issues where he's pushing up against the steel, like maybe it's a more spiritual steel now. But I think it's just something that, maybe there has been some kind of mystical bound on the character, mystical binding, excuse me. But this is him pushing harder against it than he's ever pushed before, and that's why it's unleashed these threats and this torment against him in a way that he's never faced before, I guess. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Makes
Alan,
sense.
you're nodding vigorously. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I think, yeah, Mark, you're probably right there, but I also think that Peter's had a couple iffy runs lately. and he's had a lot of iffy runs, over the last 20, 30 years. And that's just how it goes with comic characters. And most of them don't walk around bearing the weight of all of those iffy runs. They just get swept under the rug. And I expect that that is still what is going to happen, with most of these things, and that Spencer is toying with these ideas, but that his big quarry, his big target, is fixing the one thing that even people who maybe are not obsessive collectors and readers of this comic know went wrong, and that is One More Day. I mean, I think ultimately, if anything is going to get fixed here, it's just going to be One More Day. Parker Industries is not going to be wiped out of existence. It's just going to be politely memory hold, just like Sin's Past is politely memory hold, which is fine with me. I don't need cosmic forces undoing that story. I think it's just kind of Spencer's playfulness and his intelligence that has him acknowledging these things in the issue. And I guess it's up to one's own personal taste whether or not that's a little too cute.
There's been this kind of talk that like Nick Spencer's role on this book, and I've seen this not just on our show, but just kind of generally as like Mr. Fix It or Mr. Cleanup. People are like, he's doing it for us, the fans. He's cleaning it up so that someone else can have like a fresh, slate on it. And I think, it needs to be somewhere in between, which I think is what you've said all along, Alan. It's like, tell us some good stories primarily, and clean it up if you can.
Risks, and take some risks that future creators are going to have to clean up. Someone inevitably 10 years from now is going to clean up that issue where Kindred kills Peter 100 times. Like that's that's a big swing, and it's probably a mistake for the character to have Spider-Man being so deeply, endlessly traumatized the rest of his life. That the horror of that moment, of that day, of those deaths is so profound. And in this issue, I was kind of annoyed at how Peter kind of slights that,
Yeah.
seeing that setting as that was. I was really upset that my friends were here. Well, yeah, of course you are, Peter. Of course you're upset by that. But I mean, being buried alive by Craven has haunted him for 30 years. Being killed 100 times by his best friend, come on. It's just too much.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump off that, Alan, I reacted to the kind of the glibness of that scene too, and it actually, like, to your point of it will be cleaned up at some point. Like, it almost made me think, are we gonna find out that like this was like those deaths were actually like a mirage from Mysterio or something? You know what I mean? Like, is it just some kind of special effect that made him think he was dying and being resurrected, dozens of times in succession? Because like I feel like the way it was kind of brushed aside, it would have had to been like it couldn't have been real. Like we're gonna get some kind of retcon or no prize with that at some point, I think.
Well, either way, the trauma of that would impact someone, especially on the back of the clone conspiracy, where that was the very exact thing that made Ben Reilly lose his mind and become a villain.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And to me, the fact that the Spider-Man being murdered again and again has not had a greater impact on him and his psyche actually kind of exemplifies this run's general feeling that not much of what happens here actually matters to Peter. And I will go back to my original comment at the very start of this, which is I can't tell whether that is intentional on Spencer's part or whether that's just because we don't get that page every issue of Peter thinking about the current state of his life.
How have you responded, Alan? I'm just curious, because you're a writer in your own right. How have you responded to the kind of omniscient narration that we've been getting throughout this book from Peter, where he's like describing actions that he's not actually involved in? Has that stood out to you as much as it's kind of bothered me?
A bit, because it's Spencer. I'm always aware that it could be a trick. It could be somebody else. That you never quite. The thing with his entire run is you never feel quite 100% sure who's talking to you, who's conscious of what's going on, and ultimately I've kind of gotten tired of trying to work all that out.
Yeah, interesting.
But I loved the page in this issue where after the light has been let in and he swings off to go to class. When he remembers, oh no, I have to get to class. I appreciated that because I was like, oh yeah, you're in school. You never think about it. So I mean, I almost feel like this issue and I would say the couple issues after Last Remains, which I actually liked all those issues more than I liked Last Remains, uh, feels to me like the book is edging towards a more traditional run where these plots are kind of twined together. The end of this issue, where the Mysterio story, Mary Jane's movie, kind of come back into it, where we get, where we also know from the previous issues that the tablet story is still in play, and where Doctor Strange, makes his confrontation. It does feel like for the first time in this entire run that storylines are being bound up together and occurring at the same time rather than each being consigned to their own discrete issue. And that's what I mean when I say it feels more like a traditional run of Amazing Spider-Man the last couple issues. And I've been getting more and more excited about the book ever since Last Remains ended. This issue definitely solidified that for me because it's starting to feel like what Mark mentioned at the very top of the show. It's starting to feel much more like strong serialized storytelling with a sense of momentum and with like the sense of simmering plots.
I want to return to the Mysterio thing for a second.
There you have it.
I loved the kind of wrap up of this between Peter and MJ as he rushes off to class. You get this beautiful, full page of them hugging, in light in the darkness. And Peter remarks, so long as I have MJ, maybe that's all I need. And I think all of that stuff was really beautiful, and the visualization of it was really beautiful. But then, as Peter's suggesting, she's the person I can trust, we undermine that a bit by having her keeping a secret from him in the form of Mysterio. And this, for me, was the one true sour moment of this book. Not that I don't like Mysterio. I love Mysterio. But only because it took me back to what I thought was a really poor, canceled miniseries, Amazing Mary Jane, where I just did not recognize the character at all. I don't know a Mary Jane that would team up with Mysterio, or even in this case, Mysterio has known Peter's identity at least as far back as issue 1 of this run. But here, we're aware that Mary Jane is comfortable with Mysterio knowing that. And no amount of silly adventures in Hollywood is enough to make me believe that Mary Jane would be totally cool with Mysterio knowing Peter's identity and keeping that a secret from him.
Yeah, I you have no argument for me on that, Dan.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just something that bugged me a lot. I just had to get it out there.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to it because that's spot on.
Yeah, it just undermined a lot of good character work, I felt.
It all suggests that something else is going on, something more complex, which, for the first time in this run, those hints that something more nefarious is going on behind the scenes are not tantalizing, they're disappointing.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the place Mary Jane brought him to, the intimacy that these pages demonstrated, and the beauty of that splash page where they hug. I mean, to me, the Spencer and Bagley literally shine a spotlight on these two hugging, renewing maybe not their vows, but their commitment to each other, their commitment to caring for each other and helping each other out. And then immediately undercuts it. And I don't know how to read that yet. But Mary Jane savvy, maybe she's up to something. I don't know. Maybe she's smarter than the character in the miniseries.
Yeah, I mean, but it also goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago with as lovely and charming as MJ is in this issue throughout, this scene does kind of bring on this idea that there is something more, I don't want to say sinister, but just something more, like you said, Dan, how is she that okay with not only with Mysterio knowing Peter's identity, but kind of actively engaging with Mysterio about it in a way that like it's very manipulative and kind of it's it it's unnerving, you know, like what you know, like how much does MJ know to be this calm about that? It's and what does she know? And that's, you know, like again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of how this relates to kindred or whatever, but like it certainly would lend credence to wanting to jump down that rabbit hole because it's a very odd, deliberate choice to be making about the character.
And I can't really blame Nick Spencer for this one because, like, I feel like he was setting up something very different than what happened in Amazing Mary Jane, right? Like, the setup for that was Kindred has a script for Mary Jane that's going to take her away and get her out of the way for Peter to be messed with and potentially mess with her as well. And that was never touched upon in, in that miniseries. So it makes me wonder if, that is just a dropped thread here, because the way that Mysterio talks about Kindred with Mary Jane here is kind of like, you don't want to know more. Like, I'm not really in cahoots with that guy. I'm in cahoots with you now. And it's like, okay, I don't really know how that's functioning, but sure. Yeah.
I calmed myself down about this development while reading with a no prize situation, which is that, okay, it looks on the page as if Mary Jane invited Mysterio to hang out at Spider-Man's therapy session, which would be an intense violation of their relationship
Yeah,
in
no
every
doubt.
way. But we never had any tinglings of spider sense from Peter. And
No.
I mean, if sunbathers on the roof of his building set it off, I think Mysterio being in the crowd as he makes in the audience as Spider-Man makes it very clear who he is and reveals his his deepest fears. Yeah, I think Mysterio was not there for that.
Yeah, she does ask him, like, how much did you hear? And he says just enough to know, like, the pain that he's going through or something like that. So,
well,
like,
it was more. No, I thought it was just enough to know you made promises that you can't keep.
That's
I
it.
thought that was more referring to. I thought that was more referring to specifically the location of the movie premiere.
That's true. So maybe he only did come in at the very end there. It is still dubious that she's cool with Mysterio knowing his identity, but fine. Let's talk about this final scene. So Doctor Strange appears in Las Vegas, where Mephisto runs a casino there, as established in the Damnation series. I don't know. Did you guys read this series by Nick Spencer?
Dan, you are the current Marvel czar for me when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like I was today years old when I learned that's what Mephisto's doing right now.
Yeah, it was actually a really good story that kind of a bookended Donny Cates' short run on Doctor Strange, and so he and Nick Spencer teamed up to do this Damnation storyline that resulted in Ghost Rider becoming the new King of Hell and Mephisto being trapped on Earth in a casino. But that's been recently undone. But it looks like he's still just running the casino because why not? Which I think he expresses in this issue. What's more curious is that even before we know that it's Mephisto, although the text certainly gives it away, the font choice, Doctor Strange, asks him about Kindred, and Mephisto says, I don't know this person. It's Mephisto, you can't trust him, but it seems somewhat sincere, if you read it, although Doctor Strange calls him out on it again later and, confronts him and says, what is wrong with Peter Parker's soul? Partnering with a big evil smile. Up to this point, the marriage wasn't represented as like Peter's soul. But I think that's what we're going to get at. Is that this piece of the marriage was somehow damaging to the literal soul of the character. And at least to me, that's really intriguing, as much as we talked about, like, maybe it's not necessary to go back into one more day. I do think it's intriguing to me, at least, because that was my theory from issue 1, was that, like, this was the soul of the marriage in the form of Kindred. So I'm, like, keeping my fingers crossed that, like, my prediction ends up being true. In some form,
or it could just be the soul of Peter. Like
Yeah.
not to blow a hole through your theory here,
Sure.
Dan, but like I mean, it's I do wonder at the end of the day if what this whole story is going to culminate with is going to be the battle for Peter's soul. Like it just feels like that's where the pieces are starting to be moved towards. I could be wrong, but I think Peter's relationship with MJ, Peter's relationship with Harry, all of these things are kind of centered to his soul and whether something was clearly damaged or destroyed by it with the deal he made with Mephisto.
Well, I guess to close out this discussion, I just want to hear your guys' immediate reaction upon turning that page and seeing the reveal of Mephisto.
You know those circulation notices that they used to have to run on the letters page in the Marvel books like once a year, where they lay out how many issues they've sold, how many they printed, blah 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 for each individual magazine. I when Doctor Strange asked Mephisto what is wrong with Peter Parker's soul, Mephisto's response should have been to give him one of those. I love the page. I love where this is going. I'm very excited about it, despite all of my criticism earlier. If this like wraps up in like 3 or 4 issues, it's a good story. I'm with Mark that it should never have taken this long to get here. I do assume that Spencer has been waylaid and misled by editorial in a lot of ways, and it wound up with this thing getting so dragged out and protracted. But I'm hopeful that this might not be a run I relish revisiting in the future, but I am hopeful that this run will accomplish these higher, loftier goals it seems to have, and make everybody feel a little more comfortable with Spider-Man and Mary Jane doing whatever they're doing. The other thing I'll add, though, is that this issue still follows this run's tendency to not have Peter make any interesting choices or motivate any of his own action. Everything anyone does in this issue that is of note is someone besides him.
All I could say is if this was 1994, now that we got to this page finally and this reveal finally, what I would probably be expecting for the next 6 months is like maximum soulage, with an Alpha and Omega issue, the debut of like Spider Soul Side, because that's kind of, I mean, like at the end of the day, that's kind of what I feel about the Kindred story. Is I feel that this is truly just like the Clone Saga in terms of like, let's pad it some more, let's keep going, which again, like I can't imagine that the sales of this book are justifying it the way they did in the 90s, but I mean maybe comparatively they are, but no, I mean I did feel a sense, I mean in all seriousness, I did feel a sense of satisfaction, but yet it's hard to separate myself from the idea of like I've been kind of in my own way, not necessarily exactly as it played out here, but like expecting something akin to this moment now for more than a year. I mean, since the Absolute Carnage tie-ins, like I thought, like okay, now we're finally gonna get that moment, and we never did. So it's like, okay, like if we're really gonna finally ride some momentum on this story, then hallelujah, let's do it. But like if we're just gonna get maximum soulage, I am not here for it. I'm just not. Let's finally cook. Let's cook with the story.
And my feeling was just one of relief. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
relief for me or relief for Nick Spencer or whoever. Like, I just want to keep moving forward. And I think these past 3 issues have made me more confident. I know we're getting like a 6-issue and a giant-sized Spider-Man Lifeline tablet arc coming up. But I do have the confidence that that is related to this story now. Like, I think the past 3 issues have tied those together. And so I'm hoping, look, I don't want it to take 10 issues to wrap this up, but like I feel like we are moving in that direction. And this reveal to me was like, I took a breath for once to go, okay, we're acknowledging that this is where we're going. We don't have to beat around the bush anymore. We've arrived. Now let's do this thing. And that's really my kind of, this page had a lot of emotion for me. Even though I expected it, I just felt relief. Is really it.
It's a gorgeous page.
There you
Absolutely.
go.
You know, I made that mean joke earlier about getting getting a seminar on the history of fireworks when you finally get to the fireworks factory. But no, this is a fine fireworks display of Marvel madness, and I'm excited for it. And the thing is, despite my general criticisms of this run, I still have faith in Nick Spencer, who's written so many great comics, that this could still get somewhere great.
Agreed. All right,
Excellent.
so let's get to our grades. Alan, you know we do this kind of like high school grading system.
I know. I'm familiar with the show.
I
mean,
yeah.
You
All
almost
right.
got me to spit take there.
I'm straight up A- on this. The Bagley art, Peter's faces, the facing the trauma of being Peter, the meta stuff, not so much, but I get that that's some people's bag. That's fine. I guess that Marvel's not going to run letters pages anymore. They got to just put it into the book itself. But yeah, A-. This is seriously good stuff, despite some kind of minor qualms I have about the run itself.
Mark?
I'm going to be a bit of a jerk here because I'm going to give 2 grades. The first grade is going to be the issue in a vacuum by itself. I will give it a B+, because I did find it to be mostly excellent, with a few flaws that we discussed within the issue itself. But I still feel like I need to throw out there, and maybe I need to start doing this going forward until the mood is officially shifted and changed. In terms of this as a long form story, is still, I would put it like a C- right now. Like, like that can change dramatically if we finally right the ship. But like, like I'm tired of getting my hopes up with one issue and then being dashed again because long form, this thing just can't seem to get the momentum going. So I want to couch it with that like this was a very, very strong individual issue, but as a long form, this narrative still has a lot to prove to me. So that's where I'm at. You, Dan?
I'm there with you, both in spirit. I think I'm going to hedge a little bit and give this thing a B+. I think I want to give it the A-, Alan, that you gave it, but in the back of my mind is like that emotionally it didn't hit for me other than relief rather than connecting to the emotions in the book because I had already felt like I had arrived there so long ago. So in the moment, it's a B+ for me. But otherwise, I would say in the top 5 issues of the run, which probably would ferret itself out with our review scores if you look back over them. I'm not entirely sure. So B+ for me.
This will be an issue from this run that people still read.
Agreed.
Like 20 years from now, people will still read this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
I think that's fair. Yep.
All right, Mark, why don't you take us home?
I will. Well, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk. And also a very extra special thank you to you, Mr. Alan Schurstel, for joining us. Alan, do you want to tell us where we can find your stuff, or what non-Slack things you can be found on?
Yeah, I still write pieces occasionally. I had a New York Times arts feature about 2 weeks ago that was exciting about the free jazz bassist William Parker. If you want to talk about free jazz or Spider-Man, I am your man. And you can find me on Twitter at Studies and Crap, which is a handle that made great sense in 2008.
But you do still post some studies in crap every now and again on there.
Yes, I do still some, but mostly it's stuff that I scanned in 10 years ago.
Well, awesome. Thanks again for joining us, Alan. We always love having you
Thank you
on
for
the
having me,
show.
gentlemen.
Well, this episode, as always, was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser, and our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider Madge. And I hope everybody sent a thank you or some love to Rylan Bojack for our Threats and Menaces theme song from a couple episodes back. That was a lot of fun to have him return and produce that for us. This episode, like all of our review episodes, was originally released on Patreon as a live stream hangout with us back when the comic was first released. So if you'd like to help support our show's continued existence and these reviews while joining us on the live stream, why not head on over to our Patreon and sign up?
Also, Dan, we've got our 300th episode approaching fast, and you know me, when it comes to the number 300 in Spider-Man, I get very excited about 300, Stan. So if you, the listener at home, want to join us for that episode, you can do so by giving us a ring at 9 Red Goblin. Yes, we created the Red Goblin first, and let it never be forgotten. And then you can leave us a voicemail there about your memories of the show, or a kudos, or, just to let Dan Slott know, again, that he owes us a ton of royalties for that character. You can also just send an audio file to amazingspidertalk@gmail.com. If you leave your name and where you're calling from, we'll play it on our show as we look back on the past 100 episodes of Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, and I hope there'll be a bunch of fun guests on there. Maybe we even get Alan to return for 300 for a small segment.
I thought I was calling Red Goblin, but I think I was calling Goblin Chai for Goblin Child. So whoever has that number has been getting some weird messages from me.
Alan can be our
Why
Craig.
is there an E? Can I just ask, by the way, when Goblin Child announced his name was Goblin Child, how did Peter know there was an E on the end?
I don't know. Well, that's why we have him pronounce it Goblin Childy. That clearly that's the only way he could have known.
I was just gonna say, Dan,
We've been doing this.
I think in our 300th episode analogs, Alan can be our Cragley Rock thing. Okay.
I love it. So
With the little Felix the Cat pajamas. Okay, can you do it, Alan?
I will rail against the Yancey Street gang.
There you go.
There we go. So, Mark and Alan, until we all exorcise our demons as part of a one-man show held in the remnants of Manhattan's theater scene, what's our motto?
Hey, Alan, can you maybe hit me with like some jazz background while I say this line?
Don't tempt it.
Okay. With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.